We all know Lil Durk, but did you know this about him?
The interviews, you said that your dad was caught with like $8 million, 6 bricks.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to be just like him.
His iconic reign on the streets of Chicago did not start with his generation, because before Lil Durk, there was a Big Durk. And word on the street was that his father once ran one of the most respected operations on the South Side.
I ain't gonna lie, I wanted to be just like him. Yeah, all the cars, all the bitches, all the furs, all the clothes. I'm like, dang, I want to be just like him.
But power in that world rarely lasts. And today, we are going to be looking inside the street empire of Dontay Banks. And once you hear what was really happening behind the scenes, you might start to understand why Durk's story turned out the way it did. So let's rewind the clock and step inside the empire that started it all. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, Chicago's South Side was a completely different battlefield. Crack was flooding neighborhoods, and street organizations were expanding block by block. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos, a young man named Dontay Banks was quietly building what would become one of the most aggressive drug operations in the city. Big Durk's story begins like any other street gangster. His mother was hooked on drugs.
People of the ghetto and people in the inner city suffer from is they mother be kind of addicted to drugs. So that kind of makes you kind of move around a lot because there's nothing stable.
And as if that was not enough hassle, he grew up in a household with 9 siblings, the majority of whom were living that thug life. A lot of the things he later grew to become accustomed to were all things he observed growing up.
I knew if I sit there and watch them long enough, it was just like TV. Someone in the end gonna get shot, someone gonna get stabbed, someone gonna get whooped, because in the end, someone is gonna be cheap.
But eventually, he got bored with the children's games and decided it was time to fully enter the plot. Fortunately for him, he had a female cousin at that time who was already deep into the crack game, so she put him on. She handed him an 8-ball of coke and told him to get to work. He was 13, maybe 14 years old, standing on a corner in the freezing Chicago cold. And that was the moment Dontay Banks died and Big Durk was born. His words, not mine. Durk started to get recognition in the game, and very soon, he was scouted by the big boys of the Gangster Disciples and climbed his way up the ladder to meet the main man. And I'm talking about Larry Hoover. Big Durk honestly did not know what to expect.
But when you see him, he's humble, he's meek, he's intelligent.
I mean, who wouldn't be in a frenzy getting to meet a man like Larry for the first time? Larry was the guy you would hear about long before you ever saw him. Co-founded the Gangster Disciples back in 1965 alongside David Barksdale. Larry Hoover had the GDs operating across 110 cities in 31 states. And he was doing all of this from inside a prison cell, having been locked up since 1973 for murder and later sentenced to 150 to 200 years. Think about that for a second. The man is running a multi-state operation from behind bars, and the streets are still listening. That is the kind of gravitational pull that meeting Larry would have on a young man already hungry for power. It did not just validate Big Durk, it showed him the ceiling of what was possible, and suddenly, that ceiling looked very high. Coming off a visit like that, Big Durk was very careful with his empire, knowing how volatile the whole thing was. He did not do careless things like outsource leadership. He ran everything himself, 24/7, but an upset was still inevitable. You know that, like every operation, legal or not, there comes a time when the supply dries up.
There was a drought, and one of these times when there was a drought, you got to try to get work from wherever you can get it from. You know, my supply is kind of, he's out trying to find something, so I got to go to other sources.
And this is when the mistakes started manifesting. He got into a very risky company trying to secure his goods, and it eventually led to a very hot police pursuit.
I lost the police, but the actual driving that car at that speed down a one-way street that was so narrow that if anybody would have stepped out and any door would have opened, it would have been all over.
Fortunately, he was able to get away from this, but the problem is that situations like that leave cracks. And when you start patching cracks with the wrong people, that's when the whole wall comes down. Big Durk thought to strategize, and that's when he opened the door to even more errors. He tried to delegate the risky task of handling cocaine and cash exchanges to his cousin, Tasha Woods. And while that seemed like a smart move initially, Tasha flipped on him, and that was the end of Durk's empire. A whole FBI investigation followed, and Big Durk and his men got life imprisonment. Now, you would maybe expect Big Durk to keep the whole thing going from behind the bars. After all we had seen, it was possible. Larry Hoover was doing it. But that was not the case for Big Durk at all. He actually turned over a new leaf during his time behind bars. And honestly, when you think about it, it takes a certain kind of man to look at 4 walls and decide the story is not over. To choose growth in a place specifically designed to bury you. That right there says something about his character that the streets never got to see. He had 2 sons who still looked up to him despite everything. And as far as he was concerned, life was still worth living.
He's straight. You know what I'm saying? I send them letters, send them pictures, books good. Everybody from my side who locked up, they books good.
February 12th, 2019, after nearly 25 years behind bars, Big Durk won his appeal and walked out of federal prison. Lil Durk announced it on Twitter, Big Durk home. The tweet was just 3 words, but the whole world knew. Since his release, Big Durk has stayed out of the spotlight, choosing to dedicate his time to working as a life coach with Chicago CRED, a non-profit aimed at reducing gun violence in the city through outreach and counseling. A man who once ran one of the most feared operations on the South Side is now the one trying to pull the next generation back from that same edge. That is not a small thing. That is a full circle, and it says more about redemption than any interview ever could. But the big question is how much of Big Durk's past life influences Lil Durk? Because I will tell you one thing for free. Lil Durk was in awe of his father's drug empire.
I ain't gonna lie, I want to be just like him. Yeah, all the cars, all the big, all the furs, all the clothes. I'm like, dang, I want to be just like him.
Big Durk did try to turn his son's attention away from those dark times and push him to invest in his music instead. And don't get me wrong, Lil Durk actually did listen to his father.
My son is not on that type of time. He's not doing those type of things. My son is on time where he's trying to better himself and make a living as an artist.
But you know that thing people say about how the apple does not fall very far from the tree? I wish that were not the case in this story. But Lil Durk is currently on trial for a murder-for-hire plot and, if convicted, is looking at life in prison. You could have a lot of reasons why this is the case, but I will tell you that it is not a coincidence that a father and son find themselves with a similar fate. Lil Durk learned things from his father that he shouldn't have, and when the time to unlearn those things came, it was already too late. But first, just like we did with Big Durk, let's take a step back and look at Lil Durk's childhood. One thing we do know is that a few months after he was born, his father was handed a life sentence, so he pretty much grew up without a father figure. There were the prison visits, but let's be serious. You don't learn how to be a man through a glass window and a phone line. Only left with his mother, some days they could not even afford to eat. So when he was just 10 years old, he got on the streets hustling. At first, Durk thought he could make it big with basketball, but it did not take long for that dream to die. By 2010, he started dropping tracks. It took about 10 years in the grind, but he finally made it into the limelight with his song L's Anthem. The following year, he dropped This Ain't What You Want, and that was when you could say he finally hit mainstream media. Big highlight was going back to Chicago to perform the song. From there, he started to get into spaces with superstars like Drake and French Montana, and little by little, he was coming out of the local scene in Chicago and onto the global stage. Before we continue, something we have to see is that, unlike his father, Lil Durk did have options. His dad sold crack to feed, but he had this music thing going for him, and whatever crime he went on to commit was totally on him. Nobody handed Lil Durk a corner to stand on. He had a microphone, a label, and the whole world paying attention. That is not nothing. That is everything his father never had. The first saga came during the early stages of his music career, when he was arrested on weapons charges. So this was a kid hitting mainstream, but still refusing to let go of the hood lifestyle. Then there was the whole issue with the Chicago drill violence, and many people believed that Durk was one of those who blurred the line between music and violence, but Lil Durk insists otherwise.
If you and him beefing, if it ain't no blood spill, motherfucker ain't died about it, it's really nothing. If you my brother and you don't fuck with him and it was some bloodshed, I'm staying out of it.
And honestly, you would want to believe him because for the longest time, it did look like he was putting in the effort to see his music career blossom and was careful about doing anything that would sabotage it. But then came 2019. It was a dark year for Durk. Speculation started rising about an attempted murder case. He and his associate, King Von, were arrested for a robbery and shooting incident in Atlanta. Durk sat with an investigative journalist and denied all the accusations thrown at him.
Did you do it? Did you shoot this man? Did you commit the other crimes of which you're accused?
No.
He even tried to play the victim game and painted a picture of himself coming from a bad place, but looking to start a new life.
A bad background, just growing up as a child, about father being incarcerated for 25 years, 26 years. So I had a rough past. But like me moving to Atlanta, I just thought that just changed my whole identity of thinking.
And once again, we would love to just give him the benefit of the doubt, but the evidence against him was just too overwhelming. The case dragged on and on for years before it was then suddenly dropped. All the boys in the hood started wondering why everything was resolved so fast. A lot of them then started to accuse Durk for snitching because apparently that's the only way to get the feds off your back.
Watch who you call your homies. Watch who you call your homies, man. I promise. It's very upsetting for Durk to let his people down like that.
Now, you would think Durk would finally drag his head out of the mud and stay clear in building what was now a legacy in rap. But then, in 2020, something happened. His very close guy and a member of OTF, King Von, was killed.
Investigators say King Von and 34-year-old Mark Blakely both died after a shootout between two groups of men.
King Von was not just another rapper from Chicago. He was Durk's closest ally and one of the earliest members of OTF. They had come up together through the same streets, so losing Von was more like losing a brother. It all happened on November 6th, 2020. Von crossed paths with rapper Quando Rondo and his crew outside a hookah lounge in Atlanta. The two sides already had tension from the streets and social media, and when they ran into each other that night, a fight quickly broke out in the parking lot. During the chaos, one of Quando Rondo's associates pulled out a gun and opened fire. King Von was hit multiple times and later died at the hospital. And when you lose someone that close, someone you built with, someone who carried the same flag, grief does not sit still, especially not in a world where grief and retaliation have always been treated as the same thing. We first saw the effect this had on Durk in his music that followed. They were much darker and more emotional. You could tell he was really going through it at the time. He released Backdoor, which was a direct tribute to Von. It talked about betrayal and street paranoia, but Lil Durk refused to stop with just his songs. The grief he felt, together with that Chicago nature, pushed him to make one of the worst decisions of his life. In 2021, authorities began connecting Lil Durk's name to a shooting incident in Atlanta that investigators believed was tied to the tensions surrounding King Von's death. According to reports, the target of the attack was rapper Quando Rondo, the same artist whose camp had been involved in the confrontation with King Von months earlier. One night in Atlanta, gunmen opened fire on a vehicle believed to be carrying Quando Rondo. The car was shot up during the attack, and in the middle of that chaos, Quando Rondo's close friend was killed.
Right now, the search is on for 3 people who police say shot at a Savannah rapper, killing a member of his entourage. Fight taken to the streets, the ending of a shooting that started in Los Angeles, California. Sheriff's deputies pulling out a man who had been shot in an SUV.
That incident immediately caught the attention of federal investigators. As they dug deeper into the case, authorities began building a theory that the shooting was not random, but part of a planned retaliation connected to the ongoing street feud. Prosecutors later claimed that Lil Durk had used his influence and connections to help organize the people involved in carrying out the attack. Based on that investigation, he was charged with conspiracy related to the attempted hit. Durk, however, pleaded not guilty to the accusation.
Some breaking news. Rapper Lil Durk is charged in a murder-for-hire plot.
And of course, Durk pleaded not guilty in this case again. I mean, it worked back in 2019, so why not pull it again? Unfortunately, this time he was arrested and now faced the possibility of doing life behind bars, especially after people like FBG Butta made statements like this before the killing even happened.
You didn't pay me to kill. I'd have killed the wrong motherfucker for me to turn around and go kill a right motherfucker, though. But you, the police know I work for you. Cause they say Shorty flat out told they ass like, man.
The situation gets even more complicated with the whole case of Durk having an Apple Watch in prison, which led him to be put into solitary confinement. The question now isn't just whether he'll get out, it's whether he can rebuild his life after everything that's stacked up against him. Because it looks like life has given him chance after chance, and he has not been able to make good of it. And maybe that is the most painful part of this whole story. Because unlike his father, who was a product of a system with no real exit door, Lil Durk had exits, multiple ones. He walked past every single one of them. His father built an empire from nothing and eventually found redemption inside a cage. His son built a music empire worth tens of millions and still ended up in the same cage and with the same sentence, but for different reasons, of course. And that right there should make you stop and think about what is really being passed down in some households. Not just trauma, not just poverty, but a way of seeing the world that no amount of money or fame seems to be able to shake loose. Big Durk got out and chose a different path. So the question Lil Durk now has to answer for himself, if he ever gets that same chance, is whether he is willing to make that same choice. Or maybe the past has a way of catching up with you.